Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always ready.
Today, we're going to be looking at something, well, a little different.
Oh,
Chess sets.
that's interesting.
Yeah, but we're not just talking about, how to play or anything like that. We're going way back, like over 1,000 years back.
Wow. Okay.
We've got some excerpts here from, let me see, A Brief History of Chess. And let me tell you, these things are more than just pieces on a board.
I can imagine.
They tell stories,
Hmm.
like about history, culture, art, you name it. It's amazing what you can find just by looking at a chess set.
So where do we start with this 1,000-year journey?
Well, we got to start at the beginning, right?
Of course.
India, over 1,000 years ago. That's where it all began.
With a game called Chaturanga, I believe.
Chaturanga, yeah. And get this, it wasn't exactly like chess as we know it.
How so?
Sometimes it had two players, sometimes four. And sometimes, hold on to your hats, they used dice.
Dice. Wow. So there's an element of chance involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it still had that core of strategy that makes chess so fascinating. And the pieces, well, they weren't your standard king and queen setup.
What were they like then?
Think military units,
Hmm.
like real warriors and stuff.
Hmm.
Maybe even elephants, I think.
Wow. So you're saying the knight you move across the board could represented an actual knight on horseback.
Pretty cool, huh?
It's very. Though, is there any proof these early pieces actually looked like that?
Well, no photographs from back then, sadly.
Right, of course.
But experts think the names and roles of the pieces match up with old military rankings and units.
Yeah.
Plus, the way they move on the board kind of hints at it, too.
I see. So it's like each move was a tactical maneuver on a battlefield.
Exactly. Now, from India, this game, this Chaturanga, started to spread.
And it went east and west.
You got it.
Okay.
And as it traveled, it started to change.
It adapted, I imagine, to each new culture it encountered.
Exactly. Like in the East, in places like Cambodia, China, Thailand, they came up with their own versions, different boards, different pieces, even different ways to win.
Different ways to win. So the goal wasn't always checkmating the king.
Nope, they got creative. But no matter how much it changed, one thing stayed the same. That strategic thinking, that battle of wits, that's what makes chess, well, chess.
That makes sense. So what about its journey westward? How did it make its way to Europe?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. It went through Persia and the Arab world first.
And I believe that's where we see a shift in the design of the pieces.
You know it. Arab artists started to stylize the pieces. Less realistic, more abstract.
Was that purely an artistic choice?
Well, some folks think it had to do with Islamic traditions. Back then, they weren't big on depicting humans and animals in art, so they got creative with the chess pieces too.
That's fascinating. And did that stylization change how the game was played?
You bet. With those abstract pieces, you couldn't just rely on recognizing what they looked like. You had to really
Yeah.
focus on the strategy, on the moves, on outsmarting your opponent.
I see. So it was more about the mind than the visuals.
Exactly. And get this, some of the first books ever written about chess strategy, they came from Arab scholars.
Wow. So they weren't just changing the look of the game, they were developing the theory behind it.
Exactly. And finally, after all that, chess finally made its way to Europe.
Around 1,000 years ago, right?
Right on. Mostly through Spain and Sicily. They had close ties to the Arab world back then. At first, they used those same stylized pieces, but it wasn't long before Europeans started putting their own spin on things.
They started creating their own designs?
Yep. They took inspiration from their own society. Kings, queens, bishops, knights, you know it.
And that's where we start to see those elaborate, sometimes over-the-top chess sets that Europe is known for.
Absolutely. Some were practical, some were super fancy. Animals, plants, historical figures, all kinds of crazy stuff. It was like a whole art form exploded.
It's amazing how each culture left its mark on the game and its pieces.
It really is. And that European influence, it spread chess even further to America, Africa, Australia, everywhere.
Really?
Everywhere, pretty much. You know, even some of America's founding fathers were big chess fans. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, George Washington.
No kidding.
Yep. Franklin even wrote an essay about chess, called it The Morals of Chess.
The morals of chess, what was that about?
Well, it's basically about how chess can teach you valuable life lessons,
Mm.
like patience, strategy, planning ahead, all those good things.
Makes sense.
And this growing popularity of chess led to, well, even more creative chess sets.
Oh, like what?
Think travel-themed sets.
Yeah.
People were exploring the world more and more, and they wanted souvenirs. So artists started making chess sets that capture the essence of different places, like little mini vacations you could take on your chessboard,
That's clever.
isn't it? And all this, it led to a constant search for the perfect chess set.
The perfect chess set.
Yeah, one that looked amazing and played perfectly.
A tall order.
You bet. They tried all kinds of materials, all kinds of styles, and eventually in 1849 in England, they hit the jackpot.
With the Staunton set.
That's the one. The classic, the standard. You see it everywhere today.
I guess you could say they found that perfect balance.
They did. Clear pieces, sturdy design. It was a winner. But you know what's even cooler?
What's that?
Even with the Staunton set being so popular, people never stopped experimenting.
Really? What other kinds of materials have they used?
Oh, you name it. Glass, clay, wood, metal. Heck, I've even seen sets made from nuts and bolts.
Nuts and bolts. That's wild.
Yeah. And bottles, even. You wouldn't believe some of the stuff people come up with.
So what's the main thing our listeners should take away from all of this?
That chess sets are so much more than just games. They're like little time capsules, little windows into different cultures, different eras. You can learn so much just by looking at them.
Like what?
Well, you've got sets with Roman figures, Egyptian figures, Chinese figures, British figures. You've got sets inspired by stories and myths. Alice in Wonderland, the Ramayana. It's incredible.
So they tell stories about history, about literature, about art, about the people who made them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Every single one has its own unique story to tell. So next time you see a chess set, don't just see the pieces. See the history, the culture, the creativity that went into making it.
That's great advice.
And maybe, just maybe, it'll inspire you to create your own chess set, one that tells your story. What would it look like? What materials would you use? What would make it special? Let your imagination run wild. And that's our deep dive for today, folks. Thanks for joining us.
Always a pleasure.